Where does the hatred for the Jews come from in history?
Number of places, but they are people who have succeeded an awful lot in the midst of other people who have not. Years ago, one official of one of the Jewish organizations in New York asked me, well, what can Jews themselves do in order to minimize the hostility they face? I gave him a one-word answer: fail. Because as long as you succeed, you're going to be hated.
Israel, the occupying power, continues with its colonial policy and its daily violations. It continues to abuse, to arbitrarily detain, to carry out ethnic cleansing, steal land and natural resources, uproot trees, steal money. Israeli activity to Judaize Jerusalem, demolition of homes, confiscation of land and property, spoiling of natural resources.
Racist violations perpetrated by Israel.
Israel continues to commit various forms of human rights violations in Palestine.
Israel, the occupying power, is advancing in its efforts of mass colonization and continued apartheid. Put an end to this colonialist regime.
Apartheid, atrocities and massive destruction inflicted on the Palestinian people.
War crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and state terror.
Thank you. United Nations Watch.
Stopping it there before we get into the awesome, amazing, intellectual Thomas Sowell. I'm just going to say FYI right now that I'm not going to give my opinion too much in this video, almost because I'm not that well educated about the conflict between Israel and the other country. I don't know how friendly YouTube is to this conversation. I know for sure that YouTube does have a policy that there are certain communities that you cannot talk about. So there's one community in particular that is sure to get you strikes and get your YouTube channel taken off of the platform, which should concern a lot of people, that a community has that much power where you literally cannot have an opinion about it. But I will say this, I think the difference between Israelis and all of the articles that he showed of the other countries that have committed mass atrocities, genocides, ethnic cleansings, oppression, enslavement, and imprisonment of people because of their own ethnicities or religious beliefs. The reason why they don't get as much attacked or as much pushback from Western countries or Western cultures or people on the left, the progressives or liberals or whatever, is because they are people of color. It really is just that fucking simple. They are people of color, so they can get away with it. They don't get as much pushback, they don't get as much shame on yous and stuff like that. Israeli people are just kind of considered as white. They're just considered white, and for a lot of people, that's easier for them to go after because it's a part of their ideology, it's a part of their thinking, it's a part, you know what I mean? That's why you see feminists, when you question them about women's rights or women being oppressed in the Middle East, they don't want to talk about it. Those are brown people. I don't want to talk about it. That's not my culture. I don't want to shame. I don't want to judge, right? When you talk about the oppression of the LGBTQ community in Middle Eastern countries, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm from gay rights, but I don't want to talk about it. That's my culture. That's not my culture, right? But when it comes to, or when it comes to colorism or oppression of people who are darker skinned in these countries, nobody wants to talk about it. But when it comes to countries that are primarily white, it's all day, every day to criticize. It's all day, every day to bring it up. It's all day, every day to shame on you. You're oppressor, you're racist, you're a bigot, you're all these things. When it's countries that people consider people of color, they honestly just get away with crime because it's not about a lot of people who are progressive, a lot of people who think that they're woke or social justice warriors or on the left. They will stand on the platform that we are here for like marginalized communities, people of color, women, people of the LGBTQ plus community, but they are not. And again, that is very evident when a black Republican, a conservative, talk to a white liberal in the way that white liberal treats that black conservative or Republican. They will talk down to them, they will call them racial slurs, they don't care. Because it's not about that, it's about their ideology, right? And so even though there are the same things that I say that I'm against is happening in this country, those people of color, so that doesn't fit my ideology, so I'm going to stay quiet about it, you know what I mean? Anyway, I've been rambling, let's continue.
You have a chapter, that's the first chapter is black rednecks and white liberals. The second chapter is, are Jews generic? Why the jump from black rednecks and white liberals to are Jews generic? What's the point?
Well, this book is really about ethnic and cultural issues in general. So there's a chapter on the Jews, there's a chapter on the Germans, and then there's a chapter on history in general. So they're lumped together because they're all cultural ethnic issues. We move on to the Jews simply because it's a fascinating story, because among the middleman minorities, of which the Jews are the most prominent, the hostility to these people in countries around the world is out of all proportion to any other kind of group I can think of. In terms of violence, the number of Chinese killed, let's say, in 1 year, and by mob action, exceeds all the blacks lynched in the entire history of the United States. And the number of Armenians killed in Turkey, during the First World War, is greater than that. And of course, the number of Jews slaughtered on a number of occasions in history, even before the Holocaust, is greater than that. So that the question is, why this particular kind of people are the targets of so much venomous hatred? And I think the answer is that they not only succeed, they succeed in a way which is a threat to the egos of other people. That is, you can envy a Rockefeller, but he's no threat to your ego, because you say, listen, anybody can be rich if he's born a Rockefeller. But the guy who comes here, let's say from Vietnam or Korea, and arrives here with little more than the clothes on his back and a few words of broken English, and a decade later he has his own little business, and you see his son a few years after that getting ready to go off to Harvard or MIT, you got to ask yourself, you either got to, you've got to hate yourself for saying, my God, I've been stagnating, this guy was nothing and now he's risen up, or you're going to have to hate him.
He's very, very right about this, and it doesn't even go for the Jewish community. Like, he used the Asian immigrant as an example, and this is very true. If you come from a marginalized community that society says is oppressed, marginalized, or whatever, and you succeed, but you stay with the narrative of, oh, I'm so oppressed, po me, I'm victim, America's racist and, hates me and blah, 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 then you will get rewarded. You'll get applause, you'll get praise if you stick to the narrative. But if you're a person that is considered from a marginalized, oppressed community, and you succeed, and you say, well, if I can do what you can do, pull yourself out by the bootstraps, like that's on you. You have to be accountable and responsible for yourself. All of a sudden, they do not like you, because it is a mirror being held up to a community, right? Like, if you look at the Jewish community, what they've come from, the history, we all know about the history. I don't know how friendly YouTube algorithm is to this conversation, so I'm going to bat around words, but we all know about the history of what happened to the Jewish people, and people compare that sometimes what happened to black people. We all know that slavery extended for a longer period of time, and people can argue whether it was more brutal or not, but we can say both black people and both Jewish people have some history when it comes to horrific oppression, violence, genocide, and murder of those people. But Jewish people, by and large, are extremely successful, and if you look at the black community, it doesn't seem like that translated the same way, and I believe it's just mindset and culture, because if you go back to the 1950s and stuff like that, black people were actually succeeding more than they are now. Not more than they are now, and to a certain extent, right? But we're not going to talk about the black community, we're talking about the Jewish community, but I was just trying to compare. And so I feel like that's a giant mirror being held up to communities that are considered marginalized. You know, the thing, it's the same thing what he used as the example of the Asian immigrant who came here with nothing, living on, welfare or government assistance, but then creates generational wealth and gets out of that and get their own business and stuff like that. It's like, why can that person do that and the person in the hood can't do that? right? We don't like those people. Those people need to be cut down. Those people need to be given names like white supremacy and privilege and all those things, because we don't like those mirrors, right? And so I feel like that's what he's talking about when it comes to the success of the Jewish community, and they are. Even if you talk about stuff like racial IQ, Jewish people are considered to have a high IQs within their community. And I think it also, they are work as a community. They keep their money and their business within their community, and that's another reason why they've been able to succeed. And so, like, yeah, I think that's the reason why. And again, when it comes to Israel and the conflict with the other countries in the Middle East, I feel like, again, I'm not that educated on it, and I'm not going to say who's right, who's wrong, but I do think there is a very, very, very long history that is nuanced and complex, and a lot of people don't like to read between the lines, and a lot of people don't like to dig through the history and look at the nuance and look at the complexities. I'm not saying what Israel has done is right or anything like that. I'm not saying anything is justified, but I'm just saying people don't like to look at that because they have already made up their mind who's the villain and who's the oppressed. And because Israel is considered white, and the other country that they have conflict with is considered people of color, I think a lot of times people take sides based off their ideology and not based off their knowledge of what actually is happening throughout the history and the years of the countries. Again, not saying who's right or wrong, that's all I'm saying. No more, no less than that. But anyway, let's continue.
And most people, when they have a choice between hating others and hating themselves, they hate others.
Where does the hatred for the Jews come from in history?
Number of places, but they are people who have succeeded an awful lot in the midst of other people who have not. Years ago, one official of one of the Jewish organizations in New York asked me, what can Jews themselves do in order to minimize the hostility they face? And I gave him a one-word answer: fail. Because as long as you succeed, you're going to be hated.
So the source is success.
It's not only the success, it's the success starting in poverty, as the Jews did in the United States and in many other countries. And so you not only see them succeed, you see them rise up from the bottom, past other people, and the people they've passed don't like it. But there's also the fact that the role they play economically has never been understood. They're middlemen or they're money lenders, and the argument is they really aren't producing anything. You can't see anything tangible, that they don't stand at a production line turning out widgets. And so the argument is that they're not producing anything. They're simply gratuitously inserting themselves between the producer and the consumer, and they're parasites, essentially. And this argument has been made, again, not only about the Jews, but about similar groups around the world. And in a number of places, they have expelled those people or forced them out by mob actions, forced them to flee. And after they've left, the economy has collapsed. But it never teaches the lesson that, no, they were doing something.
According to a history of the Jews in the United States, staggering numbers of Jews in the decades before and after the Civil War first experienced America through peddling, which became the nearly universal American Jewish male experience. While Jewish peddlers worked as isolated individuals, their supplies came from a wider network. Each peddler functioned in a long Jewish economic chain linking shopkeepers to Jewish wholesalers in the larger cities on whom they depended for credit. The Jewish peddler on the road served as the agent of the Jewish town shopkeeper and the big city jobber. This trading network depended on intracommunal trust. Wholesaler and peddler understood each other, spoke the same language, and knew the same people. Jewish wholesalers in port cities from New York to San Francisco supplied Jewish peddlers with merchandise which they carried on their backs into the hinterlands, to farmers, miners, railroad crews, and others working far from the big cities, and often in places where there were few or no stores. Peddlers, of course, also worked in cities and in every region of the country, from the southern plantations to the California mining camps where Levi Strauss first began to sell the rugged trousers.
Learned a little bit of history about Levi. I wasn't expecting that. So this is what I was talking about, the whole community thing. They help each other out. They keep their business and their money within the community. And instead of people like seeing that and learning from it, because other communities do this too. A lot of Asian communities do this, Muslim communities do this. Instead of learning from it, we demonize them for it instead. From my experience, growing up in a black community is not like that. Especially if you aren't black enough, right? If you don't walk the walk and talk the talk and speak the lingo and stuff like that, it's very divided. It's very like you know, black women against black men, and white light-skinned black women against dark-skinned black women, and all these things. That black woman has Euro features, this black woman don't. We are very, very divided. And I feel like with the Jewish and Israeli community, they're not like that. And I don't think that's any reason to demean them. If they're to the point, if they're nationalistic to the point where they're being violent and aggressive and oppressive to people, I get that. But if that's just their culture, I don't really see why that's such a bad thing. But anyway, let's continue.
That were to make his name famous. While Jewish peddlers often worked in isolation among a non-Jewish population, they were nevertheless tied to a wider Jewish community, not only by commercial ties to Jewish wholesalers and manufacturers, but also to family members in Europe and America. They often saved money to pay for transatlantic passage for relatives in Europe to come and join them. These savings at some point also allowed the peddler to set up a little shop in town, settle down, get married, and raise a family. The wives and children then worked in the same little business. Often the Jewish shopkeeper or other small businessmen and his family lived above or behind the store. Milton Friedman's family lived this way when he was growing up, a pattern that he described as common among the immigrants to America in that era. Yet this pattern was by no means confined to Jews or to America. Similar economic and social patterns could be found among the Lebanese in Sierra Leone and among other middlemen minorities in other parts of the world. The overseas Chinese storekeeper in the Philippines was likewise willing to live in a small corner of his store.
You see this a lot even in South and Southeast Asian countries, that a lot of, I've seen this a lot in Thailand, you see this in India, where a lot of times people are living in their businesses because they will start a business and they will wait to buy a home and they will live in their business and they will save money. And so it was very common if a restaurant was closed or something like that, you'll still see lights on and you'll see like a TV on and a family gathered around a TV, and they will divide the restaurant away where they either live in the back or they live upstairs, or sometimes they would just roll out of bed in the middle of their business, roll out a mat and go to sleep, and they would do it like that. And a lot of times, again, I've seen a lot in Thailand, a lot of India, where they hire their family. You know, you need a waiter, go hire your nephew or hire your cousin, go get your uncle to help you with this business. Like, you kept the money within the family, and in the community, you helped the community out. And again, there's a lot of stuff that, a lot of, I guess, especially patriots, they like to demonize a lot of other countries, oh, America's the best, but there's a lot of things and systems that America could adopt from other countries to make it better. But again, the community thing is in America as well, but amongst other sort of more ethnic communities, again, Asian communities, Muslim communities, Arabic communities, stuff like that, they very much keep their shit in their family. They keep it in their community, which, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I don't think it's something to demonize. But anyway, let's continue.
As among the Jews, Lebanese children were initiated into their family businesses in the United States, as were the children of other middleman minorities in other countries.
Shukran, Sayyid Rais. I take the floor on behalf of the UN Watch. My name is Mus'ab Hassan Youssef. I grew up in Ramallah as a member of Hamas. I address the words to the Palestinian Authority, which claims to be the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. I ask, where does your legitimacy come from? The Palestinian people did not elect you, and they did not appoint you to represent them. You are self-appointed. Your accountability is not to your own people. This is evidenced by your own total violation for their human rights. In fact, the Palestinian individual and their human development is the least of your concerns. You kidnap Palestinian students from campus and torture them in your jails. You torture your political rivals. The suffering of the Palestinian people is the outcome of your selfish political interest. You are the greatest enemy of the Palestinian people. If Israel did not exist, you would have no one to blame. Take responsibility for the outcome of your own actions. You fan the flames of conflict to maintain your abusive power. Finally, you use this platform to mislead the international community, to mislead the Palestinian society, to believe that Israel is responsible for the problems you create. Thank you.
That was some tea. Again, I don't have any opinions. I am not that well educated about the conflict. I just know it's long, nuanced, and complicated. But I will say that it's nothing new for a government to put the blame on something else so they don't have to take accountability for their own issues. We see that in the States where you see politicians blame the invisible white boogeyman and racism for their lack of improvement to the society or the system. So I wouldn't say I don't believe it, but because I've seen it happen. That's what you do. It's not our fault. It's them over there. They're the enemy. We didn't do anything wrong. Anyway, let's continue. Oh, that was it. Okay. Alright guys, this video is fucking long, so we're going to end it there. You guys have an amazing day. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the button to get notifications when I do upload. All of that really does help with the algorithm, guys. And you guys have a great day. Bye.